Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. I've been traveling a lot. I'm slightly I was traveled all the way from Norway. I was in Norway yesterday, traveled all the way here, came just up from London. And I had this thing where I kind of try to fast. I'm just saying this. So I haven't eaten for 20 hours. So I was going to take a meal beforehand. But I thought if I took a meal beforehand, you'd probably find me sleeping on the floor here, so that's not kind of a good idea. But, actually, what I find is quite amazing about mind over matter. I was saying to Abdul Latif earlier, what's the most powerful instrument in the world? And the most powerful instrument in the world is our brains, subhanAllah, that Allah Ta'ala has given us. It currently processes, even as we sit here in this room, 500 million megabits of information per second. Some people, they get really excited, oh, I've got 4G, or I've got 60 megabits fiber optic line for my internet, and you think, oh wow, how fast that is. Your brain that Allah Ta'ala created is processing, I said 500 million megabits of information per second. Every cell in your body is currently connected to the brain and is having a feedback loop. And the way that Allah Ta'ala made it is such that only maybe 10% of it is actually conscious, and 90% of it is in the subconscious. Because if you allowed all that mass amount of information to come into your consciousness, we couldn't function. It's called the reticular activatory system. It's a system that we have in our brains which actually filters out and only brings into our consciousness what we need to be conscious here and now. And the more you study neurological science, the more you study how amazing this thing is, the more you're convinced that this is a product of only Allah Ta'ala's perfect design. And I challenge anyone to that, really. That's a talk in itself. What I want to talk to you, have a conversation really with you about, is about the state of our community's mental health and the state of our young people's mental health, which is a real great matter of concern. You mentioned a number of things about my career, but ultimately, I'm a psychologist, and I've been a therapist now for nearly 30 years. I graduated in 1990, got my master's in psychology, and the reason I became a psychologist is interesting because back then, what was interesting when I decided to do psychology, everyone told me it is haram. What are you doing this haram thing for? This is Western and all these kind of ideas, but I've always been what I call a practitioner in the transcultural model, which is about actually recognizing that this is not about reinforcing a Eurocentric or a medical model, but actually recognizing the complex interplay of mind, body and soul, which I'm going to talk about. We actually have a discipline in Islam called Islamic psychology, nafsiyah, ilm al-nafs, which we've had for 1400 years. It's just one of those many things that we are completely oblivious of. Just in the same way, I've been doing a lot of talks recently on the environmental crisis. In Islam, we talk about the environment 1400 years ago, conservation, water conservation, planting trees, the effect of the imbalance in the heavens and the earth, global temperatures, everything. Even Allah says in the Quran, وَأَقِيمَ الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانَ. Do not, observe the balance that Allah created in this universe with justice, and do not upset the balance. Do not be a disruptor, because Allah Ta'ala made you inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. He made you as a khalifa, as the one who is a successor in the land, which means that our responsibility as elders is to leave the planet in a better position for those who come after it. That's the amana. But we're not doing it, because it's one of the many subjects that we don't even talk about. And mental health is a subject we just don't talk about. So the biggest problem with depression and anxiety in our community is the fact that we don't even acknowledge it exists. We don't even acknowledge it as a problem. And when someone says that, I'm going through depression, I'm going through a mental health problem, the stigma associated with it for most people means that, guess what? We do not want to know about it. It's almost like I always say, the best way to describe it is like someone who's got really bad breath. When you have someone with really bad breath, what you're trying to do is, you're polite, aren't you? And you say, oh, but you're actually trying to get away with them from them. And that's what it's like to have a mental health problem. And that's why, unfortunately, one of the biggest barriers is that. And one of the most amazing things that the Prophet ﷺ did when he had people who had mental health problems in his community amongst the companions, or disability as well, is that he gave them dignity. He elevated them. He did not make them feel like lesser human beings. We have something called the social model of disability, which is basically this idea that people who have disability now, we want them to be fully integrated into societies, not to be left as pariahs or outcasts who are shunned away and hidden in the recesses of society. We want them out there in the mainstream. That's what the social model of disability is. The Prophet ﷺ did it 1400 years ago. In fact, in Islam, there isn't even a word for disability. There isn't. Because it's just a test from Allah, or it's just part of a challenge that we have. Abdullah ibn Maktoum, radiallahu anhu, he was a blind man. He's the one that in the Surah Abasa wa Tawalla is referred to, yeah? And in Medina, this blind man, who most people might have shunned or felt was a lesser human being, what did the Prophet ﷺ do? Except make him the mu'adhin, the one who made the call to prayer. And then when he said, when I leave Medina, the one who is left in charge is Abdullah ibn Maktoum. So he elevated, just in the same way he destroyed race consciousness by saying Bilal is my brother, radiallahu anhu, and that Abdullah ibn Maktoum has no deficiency whatsoever, it's just what you see. And Allah says in the Quran, you know, that do not look at their bodies or their wealth, but look at the qalb as-salim. Just in the same way, in mental health, the Prophet ﷺ himself was ridiculed and vilified and abused by the Quraysh. He was called Majnoon, crazy, na'udhu billah. And it's bad, so sad that we have regressed in our communities with our cultural patterns of behavior, which are not in accordance with what Islam actually teaches, the way we treat people with mental health in our community. So the biggest barrier is that when someone is going through depression, whether it's postnatal depression, perinatal depression, or clinical depression, or anyone is just having a difficult part in their lives, just like the Prophet ﷺ had. He had in the 6th year of the Makkah period, it's called Am al-Huzn. It's a year of sadness. He was sad. He was depressed. But he was resilient. And he showed emotional resilience and bounced back and overcame that. So that's the amazing thing about the Prophet ﷺ, dealing with stuff. And that's why he's uswatun hasana, a great example for us, because he dealt with so many challenges and was able to overcome it. But he gave dignity to people. He didn't humiliate them. Now, one of the interesting things about when someone has a physical illness, like cancer, or heart disease, or something which is physically manifest, we are programmed and conditioned to show them sympathy, concern, and to try to basically accommodate their illness. Someone has cancer, immediately we're programmed socially to have a reaction. Oh, really sorry to hear that. Now it shows sympathy. Oh, let me think about, Google up ways to get ilaj, cure for you. You know, oh, I've heard about, you know, cannabis can reduce, cancerous tumours and things like this, yeah, and turmeric and haldi, and people come up with all kinds of ideas, and they show a lot of sympathy and concern. So that someone is diagnosed with a mental illness, somehow we don't show the same concern. We don't Google it. We don't show interest. We actually think, okay, let me avoid this person. When it's a hidden disability or a hidden disability which compounds with also mental health, such as autism and Asperger's, and people show erratic and weird behavior, we just think, oh God, I've got to get away from this person. And that's just the way that we've been socially programmed. Not just in the Muslim community, on a global level, the biggest challenge is actually overcoming stigma and the shame that is associated with people with mental health. And just to give you an idea of that, Kimran, what is the four most frequent words used to describe people with mental health problems in this society? What are the 4 words that are most commonly used? Anyone, come on, let's have some interaction. Number 1 would be what?
Crazy.
Crazy. Honest. See, have some honesty. Let's have an honest discussion. Crazy. Come on, sisters. What?
Yeah.
Retarded. Retarded. Okay. Don't know what kind of friends you hang around with, sister. Honestly. Damn, they're really abusive. Yeah, sister. Sister, you at the back. You had your hand up? No. Okay. No problem. Anyone else?
Possessed.
Possessed. Yeah. That's another one. Oh, he's just teaching. Yeah, that's it. He's just seeking nothing really bad going on. Suck it up, you're just seeking attention. Yeah, that's alright, good one. Okay. Crazy, majnoon, possessed. But jinn. I'm going to talk a bit about that later as well.
Dramatic.
Dramatic. Oh, this person is a bit of a drama person, who just wants to be a centre of attention, just wants to cause disruption for other people. Anything else? Weirdo, schizo, jacko, crazo, loopy, ape, whatever it is, loco, mental, it goes on and on. We have so many, and I'll show you a bit later. So many words. In my own language, I speak Punjabi Urdu, yeah? We don't even have a word which describes pagal. That's what we say, pagal, crazy. God, we don't even have a language which dignifies people going through that. And I want you to think about it. If you're going through so much utter internal distress and despair, and the biggest barrier that you have is that you will be confronted with two things. A whole barrage of abusive descriptions, which make you feel even more, you could say, anxious and stressed and depressed. And the fact that, you know what, you're actually a very bad Muslim as well, because you shouldn't be getting depressed if you have faith. But that's why the Prophet ﷺ is a beautiful example for us, because he went through hardship and difficulty emotionally, and he overcame it. You know, there are scars in our brains that are caused by trauma. I've just been in Norway all week working on what, guys? I've been helping them develop their suicide protocol for Syrian refugees, because the Syrian refugees are coming there and they're committing suicide because they've come from a war zone, and their scars are not physical scars. Now, people can conceptualize physical trauma. If there is a leg break or an arm break, there will be a physical injury. The arm will be contorted, the bone might jut out, there will be blood, there will be bruises, a person will be screaming. That's what will happen with a physical trauma. Guess what our programming is, guys? You know what? Oof, ooh, don't come near that. I wouldn't come up to that guy and say, oh, I know what's wrong with you and your arm. I wouldn't do that, because I know that I'm adding trauma to this physical trauma. But when there are emotional scars, which I'm telling you, emotional scars, as a person who's done this for 30 years, nothing shocks me. I work in prisons, I work in refugee camps, I've worked all over the world on trauma, I've worked with people who have experienced horrific abuse and violence and been through terrible experiences. And nothing, really shocks me. And emotional scars are far worse than physical scars. And they're hidden. And people wear masks to cover them up. And guess what happens? Because you just don't see the physical, the emotional scar, the scar in the brain. Because remember, everything's coming back to it. And an emotional trauma is basically that. It's a connection of neurons, and it's a chemical reaction in your brain which has embedded that experience, that horrific, terrifying trauma and shock and experience that you've had. And people in this room, I know, have trauma. You've gone through it, and you've learned ways to cope with it, or you haven't got ways to cope with it. And then guess what happens? We re-traumatize people all the time when they see things which just trigger those emotions and those feelings. Or we don't even acknowledge that they've gone through such horror, and they carry it to a point it becomes unbearable to them. And unfortunately, tragically, people take their lives. So I was working on a suicide protocol there, because we have quite a number of individuals who have come from various parts of the world as refugees, asylum seekers, and they've committed suicide, and they often commit suicide when they're here, obviously, that they have to also go back, they have to be sent back home to the place where they've come from, where they experienced all that trauma in the first place, and the only way they see it out is through suicide. But they know suicide is haram. And with people who have mental health problems, from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, all they're doing is trying to figure out an excuse not to kill themselves. And then you know what we say in such a judgmental way? I'm not saying you as an audience, but as a community, you know what we say? Oh, suicide is haram. That's it, haram, please on them. Oh, make dua, isbiru, have sabr, ittaqullah, have taqwa. It's not enough when someone's absolute life is in complete turmoil and chaos. And they need a hug, and they need support, and they need some love and some compassion and some care, and someone to listen to, and a friend, a network. And we just can't provide those things. And that's why their silence kills, because they realize it's no point talking to anyone. It's no point talking to anyone about them, because all they will do is just tell me I'm a drama queen, or I'm someone who's just seeking attention, or I'm just crazy, or I've just got a delusional view of the world. Until they take their lives, and they never told anyone about it. I want to start off with quite a dramatic story, because I want us to learn from a very, very serious story that I've worked on. And it just shows you how complex these issues are. And when you're dealing with a complex issue, you can't just provide a simplistic solution. And our deen, it encompasses us with principles which allow us to provide, like I said, a meaningful human solution which enables the person to achieve the best version of themselves. I was working with a transgender male to female conversion about 2 years ago. It's another one of my specialities around psychosexual work. And I started this work because there were no Muslims doing it. There was no Muslims doing psychosexual work at all. And people thought, oh, what are you doing? Because actually I found 80% of the problems I was dealing with had a sexual basis to it. It's another one of the taboo areas that we just do not talk about. So people suffer in silence. And so people go through these things. And, you know, if you're a transgender individual, come on, man, what kind of sympathy are they going to get in the Muslim community? Really? You know, most people are going to say, oh, you know, you're just mad, crazy, foolish, and a harami. That's it. That's all we're going to get. So this individual, obviously, who had gender dysmorphia, and it's a real phenomenon. You know, it's a reality. You know, you have individuals who are born with both genders. You do have it. It's an incidence, it has a certain particular incidence in the population. Or you have some physiological, biological, endocrinological basis to it, and psychological basis to it, often related to trauma. Whenever someone goes through a gender conversion, it takes a minimum of 2 years of counselling that they're required to have, which actually explores their gender dysmorphia, the fact that they're a male, they feel they're a female, and vice versa. And that's very important, because it's a very robust process that gives it to experts, not lay people. And this is the way of our deen. Ask people of Ahlul Ilm, people of knowledge or experts in their own respective fields. Experts in the field to actually explore with them over a period of time before they start to go through a transition process and the reassignment, gender reassignment process. And I always say go through the 2 years, because I know that through that 2 years of process, most people will go through a real discovery of what the gender dysmorphia is. But if you're brought up in a particular community where we immediately react to the situation, so his family, you can understand, traditional Pakistani family, just cast him out. They just chucked him out. And I kept on saying to them, no, work with him. Let him go through, encourage him to go through the counselling. People say, oh, we're not going to encourage him to do this, it's haram, it's all that. It's not actually, you know, and I'll give you my textual proof afterwards, yeah? And so, no, work with him, because if you reject him, then what are you pushing him towards? So therefore, what he did is that rather than, and by being cast out and rejected by his community, what did he do? He moved from his town straight to Manchester and joined in, met people from the transsexual community there who bullied him as well. And this is the tragedy. He was bullied on one side by his family to come to another group of people who bullied him as well. And they tried to put a massive amount of pressure on him to get black market drugs to transition. Because these are not counsellors, these are not therapists, these are not experts in the field of psychosexual development and construct. These are individuals who are part of that particular community, and this is in no way kind of like a critique of transgender, the community at all. It's just about what happens when we reject people. And so what did he do? In order to pay for the drugs, to have his gender assignment, he started to obviously act as a male, as a transgender escort. So he was selling his services for sex. And then his mum told me, obviously, on one occasion he was raped by 10, and you might not want to hear this, but I'm just telling you what I'm, you know, because sometimes I think don't people realise what's actually going on under the scenes. We talk about depression and anxiety in such a word. No, this is actually something much more, you could say, like I said, actually the utter trauma and chaos that's going on in people's lives that we are somehow in denial of. So his mum told me that, you know, just, you know, because he was selling himself for sex to buy the drugs in order to have the transition, that he was raped by 10 men on one occasion. So he would, you know, and then his mum calls me up. And it's not the first time, guys, but his mum calls me up and says that, you know, Aaron Rahmallah has just committed suicide. And when a mother has to come and tell me that, you know, her son has committed suicide. He dropped out of the religion. Alhamdulillah, he came back a bit, but back to the religion, but he dropped out of the religion. That's the other thing. I'm dealing with people, you know, when we look at maqasid of the Sharia, protection of life, protection of deen, hifz al-aql, protection of the mental state. The first part of this whole process is the basic recognition that we have a challenge out there, and the challenge is getting worse and worse. We look at levels of self-harm in the Muslim community and how that we do not create a safe space for us to talk about these challenging issues without a judgmental approach which more or less gives a simplistic black and white answer. have sabr, have taqwa, deal with it, and that's it. You know, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not burden you more than you can bear. I know Allah doesn't burden us more than you can, but I still need help to get through difficulty. Don't just fob someone else. What killed Aaron is us as a collective. Because what the first part, his family cast him out. And then the second part is that a group of people embraced him who also put massive bullying and pressure on him. I'll take questions after, yeah? It's okay? You save it inshallah, yeah? Who also put massive pressure and bullied him to do that. And if he'd have just gone through a process of therapeutic work, of dealing with his gender dysmorphia and the underlying root cause of the issue, then the journey might well have been much better managed and dealt with. People might think that's a very dramatic example that I've just given you. It's not. It's not dramatic, as I said. I've just come back from, I remember I did a course in South Korea, and I got invited by the South Korean government about this, 10, 12 years, I can't remember. Although, you know, it was, you know, South Koreans, it's not a Muslim population, it was just, because what was happening, interestingly, in South Korea was that in their main universities, there's so much pressure and expectation on the students to achieve. There comes a point where they can't do it. They walk to the top of their building and they would just walk off. And they had a massive number of suicides that would take place. So they sent me to do a suicide prevention program there in South Korea. And you know what, in my own community, we don't have the, and this is the thing, we in our community don't commit suicide in the same level as others. I know some people might get a bit distressed by some of the stuff that I'm talking about. You need to talk about it afterwards, and inshallah, you know, we'll arrange something. But we don't commit suicide because we know it is haram. And that dhabra, that small acceptance, even though my faith might be really weak at the time, that it's haram, stops me from doing that. And so we don't see so many suicides blatantly, but that doesn't mean that people aren't suffering massively and aren't harming themselves in lots of other ways. You know, one of the amazing things about the Prophet ﷺ, he had such amazing emotional intelligence that he could read a face, and he could read what was really being said by the face. And there's a well-known hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, where he was starving, hadn't eaten for days, and he just approached the Prophet ﷺ on a pretense. If I ask him something, that he would take pity upon me, take me home and feed him, you know, and that would be fed. And before he opened his mouth, the Prophet said, "Be quiet." And he brought a bowl of milk, and it was, you know, a bowl, and a goat was milked into it, and then he drank from it, and then all of Ahl Sufa drank from it. And so it was, you know, it was miraculous that all of them drank to their complete full on this milk, you know, subhanAllah. But it was the emotional intelligence of the Prophet ﷺ, just to see the face and know what was going on behind the face, that we don't seem to have anymore. And on top of that, not just emotional intelligence, but enormous emotional resilience, because the Prophet ﷺ went through so many challenges and difficulties, losing so many people around him, but kept that control. You know, even when it means that, you know, that verse in the Quran, وَالْكَاذِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ, to consume the anger, to have the emotional control to deal with yourself in a time when you're enraged, and not to lose it, and to keep focus, you know. And that's the sunnah, to have that compassion, to have that connection, to be able to deal with it. You know, interestingly, there's a book by Johan Hari who talks about a new way of dealing with depression. And and he's saying what we probably said all along. You know what? You know how we overcome our depression? Not through SSRIs, you know, through antidepressants, or not through any kind of necessarily therapeutic methods or therapy, or just by human connection. By feeling that we belong to a group of people who genuinely care about us. We provide that love, that compassion, that support, that cooperation, that help, that akhuwa, brotherhood, sisterhood. And we feel that we're part of it. And it's one of the most difficult things that we actually try to find. I have another client who involved in very high-risk behavior. And the only reason it is because he doesn't have friends. He's so isolated and alone most of the time. And that's why he engages in this particularly high-risk behavior that he has. So Muslims don't commit suicide on a global level in comparison to other groups. That just because we don't see it manifest in this statistic doesn't mean there's not a problem. So that's generally the approach we take. We only react when we see something quite serious taking place. So this is a presentation I want to do on young people mental health, and this is an important value principle. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah does not change the condition of people until they change themselves. This is a talk which is meant for us to bring about some kind of a change in how we deal with mental health in our communities, and about creating a movement which recognizes this is something real. Every single one of us in this room at some point in our life will go through distress. May Allah Ta'ala protect you and preserve you and guide you towards the help and support you need to overcome it. Ameen. Because if you don't, guess what? Everyone in this room is just 1 or 2 steps away from despair. Believe me. As I said about the South Korea example, massive expectation. I know a lot of you young people who are my children's age, okay, I'm 51, so obviously, you know, I'm a bit of an elder, yeah? And so I know a lot of you, your parents put massive expectation on you. And they want you to achieve their dreams for them. I had a case, and that's why this verse, you know, beautiful verse in Surah At-Tawbah, لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَءُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. The Prophet ﷺ, it grieves you that he should receive injury and difficulties, anxious over you, full of concern and mercy, Ra'uf Rahim, yeah? Now, I had a case, and again, where a young person was sent to me. And it was said to me that ungay him, because he was going onto the online space, meeting guys, having conversations, and he was being sexually groomed online. Ungay him, because I have a magic wand, you see. I have the ungaying, I'm the ungay expert, apparently. And of course, you know, and that's generally how it is. Do you know, every week I'll have a call like this, or a couple of calls, you know, 3 or 4 different calls. Or my son, or my daughter, my son's got a drug addiction, or my daughter, she's on the online space, she's hypersexualized and she's going out and she's being groomed by guys. I have these calls every week. And one of the things I say, okay, first thing is this. You know, every child is born upon fitrah, and the parents make them into fulan. You had this blank slate. You're now handing this person over to me at the age of 16, 17, 18, whatever it is, yeah? So therefore, the construct of their behavior was created by you for the last 16, 14, 13, whatever years it is. And you're washing your hands. Washing your hands. You know, someone's got a drug problem. What's the root cause of why that individual has an alcohol and drugs problem? What are they escaping from? What is this drug? What hole is it filling? And who created that hole in the first place? Somehow I've got this thing that will just go away one session with me, and then it's done. And I remember one parent who had his son had a drug problem. I said, no problem. I need him for 3 months. I will work with him for 6 hours every day to do a full reboot, mind, body, and soul. That's what you call a holistic, integrative approach, yeah? In which we will completely rebuild him, okay, with his cooperation, to explore his demons, the root causes, and then we will try to. And Mum said, oh wow, yes, we'll sign up to that. I said, sister, it doesn't exist. And the point I'm saying is, you know how many masjids have we got? Nearly 1,500 masjids, and we spend millions and millions on these mosques. We haven't got a single mental health retreat in the country for 3 million Muslims. Not a single one. So that people can come and we can actually provide a spiritual model of mental health therapy for them. When models that practitioners like myself have been working on for the last 30, 40 years, and people more eminent than myself. Not a single one. Not a single place for people to come and actually to deal with horrific abuse, trauma, violence, mental health problems, and challenges that they've gone through in their life. And this is only getting more. In the next 10 years, we're only going to see an increase, not a decrease. And are we geared up? Where are our female therapists? Where are I have so many female clients, and of course I want to refer them on to other women because I feel that gender matching is much more effective in dealing with some of these issues. Where are our female therapists and counsellors? Where are they? Who are working within what we call a culturally competent spiritual model, rather than just reinforcing the kind of mental health model. Don't complain if you're not going to be part of the solution in terms of being able to deliver it. If all I can do is maybe 1 session or 2 sessions because I'm just one practitioner, even though I have trained practitioners. when someone is going through a trauma, it's a gaping wound in their brain, and we're putting a plaster on it, which means there will always, that plaster will just come, and we're just reinfecting that wound time and time again. So this kid, his uncle wanted me to ungay him. No one was there when his mother abandoned him when he was a child, because he was mixed race. Father's Pakistani, mother was white. He grew up in a brown family as a white kid. And he had, so his mum never had a mum in his life. That creates massive detachment disorder. At the age of 16, he's still sleeping in his grandmother's bed. No one said anything about why is he, a 16-year-old kid, sleeping in his grandmother's bed, because grandmother wants to have an attachment to him. No one said anything about that. No one said anything when he found his father, who had a heroin overdose, because he was a big heroin dealer in that particular town, and he found him on the kitchen table in the morning after he said goodnight to him in the evening. No one said anything about that to him. No one said anything about all the bullying he had at school because he was a white kid in a brown school. No one's going to say anything about it. All we want to say is ungay him, because he's going out there and he's hooking up with guys in the online space because they're the only ones who are showing some love for him. That's it. We react to the problem, we react to the end point. No one actually bothers to even actually analyze the backstory of what's going on. And we're so judgmental. We're so judgmental as a community. It's again one of the big things, one of the biggest barriers towards overcoming the barrier. We overcome that barrier, which then gets someone to actually tell me what's going on in their lives. To recognize there's always something much more to it. He's doing well now, alhamdulillah. Why? Because you know what? He was able to talk about this stuff for the first time in his life. And the reason that he wasn't a big, strong, macho man like his dad, who was involved in drug supply, was because he didn't want to be that. He just wanted to be himself, and so therefore he's been told all his life, you're gay, you're gay, you're gay, because you're not a tough guy going out on the streets, you get involved in gangs and stuff. And you don't beat people up. There's always something much more, and it comes down just to this. Connect with people on a human level. Be present in their lives. Spend time with them, not 5 minutes with them, and don't fob them off with just a platitude. One of the amazing things about the Prophet ﷺ, he overcame mental health stigma 1400 years ago. There's a beautiful hadith of Ibn Abi Rabaha, who read Ibn Abbas. He said to me, shall I show you a woman of the people of paradise? And he said, yes. Now, this is a woman that most people in that society would have said is a nobody, insignificant. Would have said that they wouldn't in no way have elevated that person. Look at our communities and societies today, who we elevate and who we derogate, who we say are the elite and who we don't even give time of day to. And you'll find that if the Prophet ﷺ is around today, guess who he would be spending most of his time with? The people that have been the outcasts and the rejects, the dispossessed, the downtrodden. That's it. Malcolm X put it in a beautiful way. He said, if Moses, Jesus and Muhammad ﷺ were here today, you would find them on the streets with the downtrodden and the dispossessed. Okay, it's interesting how who elevates and what. And so, this black lady came to the Prophet ﷺ. She says, I get attacks of epilepsy and my body becomes uncovered. Please invoke Allah for me. Now the first thing is this. The Prophet ﷺ is accessible and available. And she felt that there was no barrier for her to go and disclose what was going on in her life. And the feeling is, she felt that I will be listened to, taken seriously, and I will be supported. Now, really, this is the role of an Imam and a faith leader. I run a course for pastoral care for faith leaders. Again, I was doing that in Norway as well. And the role of the Imam is what? It's not just to lead prayers. Anyone can lead prayers if you have the ability to read the Quran correctly and things like this, and you know the fiqh of it. Anyone can lead a prayer. The role of the Imam is essentially pastoral care, to look after your flock, to be connected to your flock, to realize, and that's 80% of the role. Advice, guidance and support, which helps to deal with the dilemmas that you're going through in your life as a counselor, as a therapist. All of it underpinned by the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, by understanding of what brings us closer to Allah and builds our Iman and Taqwa. That's what it is. It's the role of an Imam. How many of our Imams today really have those skills, that we will go and disclose to them the innermost secrets and difficulties that we've been through, and disclose the problems that we've had. How many of them are even accessible? Give us even time of the day. How many of them even on a linguistic level, on a conceptual level, understand our lived reality? These are the barriers. This black lady, and she said to the Prophet, I get epilepsy and my body becomes uncovered. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you wish, be patient, and you will have paradise, and if you wish, I will make dua for your cure. So that's now the Prophet ﷺ diagnosing the situation. He does not say to her, you're crazy, na'udhu billah, you're an attention seeker, that you're a drama maker, that you are just someone who is delusional. No. The Prophet ﷺ actually does an amazing diagnosis to recognize that this is a neurological disorder. Because look, again, how amazing it is in Islam. We believe that the causation of disorder can be jismi, aqli, and ruhi, mind, body, or soul. And each of them have their disorders, each of them have their diagnostic tool, and each of them have their ilaj. And there is nothing better as a spiritual cure than the Quran, shifa'un wa rahmah. And Allah gave us a physical shifa and honey as well. There's lots of physical things that to do with the jism. And likewise, maqasid of the Sharia is hifz al-aql, is to protect the mental state. It's one of the objectives of the Sharia. And that's why إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرُ وَالْمَيْسِرُ وَأَنْصَابُ وَالْأَزْلَامُ وَالرِّجْسُ مِنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. That khamr, which creates yakhmur, a befuddling or an intoxication of the mental state. Why is it that we preserve the mental state? Because it's very important that we are conscious and that we are present and we are, that we are not mentally losing faculty. I mean, these ideas are amazingly progressed for 1400 years ago that we've given. The Prophet ﷺ, he did not stigmatize her. He did not disbelieve her. And he realized that they didn't have a cure for epilepsy back then. So the Prophet ﷺ said, look, have sabr. Yes, because sometimes you've got to deal with it. But I'm not just going to say have sabr. I'll try to do whatever I have within the tools that I have available to me to actually help you and assist you as well. So I'll still make dua for your cure. He said, I will remain patient, but I become uncovered. So please invoke that Allah that I do not become uncovered. And so he made dua for her. Amazing story. Really, around mental health stigma, challenging stigma, dignifying people, being accessible to me, being available. This is the therapeutic method. This is enough in this to teach us how we deal with these particular types of situation. Today, I have people, and this is the amazing thing, I've been a therapist for 30 years. 30 years ago, and I studied Ruqya with some big shuyukh as well, so obviously it's in my toolbox. Of course, we don't dismiss, we have to use Ruqya. We have to use the Quran, it's amazing, alhamdulillah. Okay? And a lot of people do call me up and they say, oh, we want Ruqya. I say, no, you do it yourself. Because that's the sunnah, to do Ruqya yourself, by the way. And if you don't, then you're actually denying yourself the 70,000 who enter paradise without any reckoning, and those who do not seek ruqya. So I find it a bit bizarre that 30 years ago, I actually used to, like I said, run a spiritual pilot. We used to do read on people, and obviously we used to do ruqya in psychiatric institutions. I used to do it. I used to have a surgery. It helped people. Alhamdulillah, because I believe the Quran is very powerful. Sajda is very powerful, ruku is very powerful. All these things are really, really powerful things to help us to have a mind, body, and soul alignment. And I will always have it in my toolbox. Going to the masjid, and the whole world is a masjid in that regard. Yeah, you don't know how amazing sajda, for example, is as a therapeutic tool. Anyway, so 30 years ago, very few people used to come to me and ask me that, oh, we have jinn. But now everyone has got jinn. And we've got these Rakis, the new rock stars I call them, yeah? Okay? All over the place, these exorcists who have whole pages of classified mags, and they're making a ton of money exploiting vulnerable people. They're unqualified, most of them. What's the qualification of making ruqya? Just like you can read Surah Fatiha, that's enough. My sheikh, when I learned ruqya over 30 years ago, he said, you can't be a Raqi unless you pray Fajr and Isha in Jama'ah in the masjid. That was one of the things that before he even took you on as a student. Okay, because he said, you require a certain level of qualification and skill. But on top of that, who are these people? And they actually make a mockery of Islam. Because, you know, they'll come and say, oh, this child hasn't got epilepsy. And this, because even though there has been a brain scan, and we've recognized that there is a neurological center within the brain which is responsible for the epileptic behavior, and there is clear brain lesions and neurological disorder. No, we can't believe these. These people, they are shaitans. They are the people who have no... You know, I hear this stuff. Of course, use the Quran in parallel to other treatments. And I've had so many cases where people reject this, and then their condition gets worse and worse, and more harm. And this is what we call an unqualified practitioner, who does not have diagnostic tools. The person, you do your Quran, you use your diagnostic tool. If it works, alhamdulillah, because Allah Ta'ala is Ash-Shafi and He's bestowed Shifa. If it hasn't worked, then it must mean it's something else. And that's the hadith of the Prophet, seek the cure. So you went to a spiritual practitioner, it didn't work. You went to a physical, a herbalist, a homeopath, whatever it is, and then you went to a psychological practitioner, neurologist, whatever. You sought the cure in parallel, all the time believing that the cure is going to come from Allah. This is the methodology, this is the amazing methodological approach that we have in Islam. And then when we have ilm al-nafs, the whole of Jungian psychology is based on the Islamic concept of ilm al-nafs, okay, which is about achieving self-actualization by achieving the true sense of the self, which in Islam we call it nafs al-mutma'inna, the soul totally at peace. Going from amara bis-su through lawama to mutma'inna. We have this amazing model, and we've just kind of thrown it away instead of superstition and stigma and culture. So why is it that so many people now, guys, brothers and sisters, choose to conceptualize their mental health in terms of spirit possession rather than actually use the appropriate diagnostic tools? And I'll tell you why. It's easier for someone to believe they're possessed rather than they have depression, anxiety, or a mental health problem. Because if you believe you are possessed, you absolve agency. What that means is that it's not me, I'm not responsible for this, it's the jinn that possesses me that makes me do this. Because if you have to accept that you have a mental health problem, you've got to deal with the root cause, and you've got to accept and not be in denial of the root cause by brushing under the carpet, as all the cases that I've described to you. There are some terrible secrets and hidden experiences that have to be discussed, and people don't want to do it. I've had so many, hundreds of clients over the years, that when I really identify what the root cause is, that they go into denial mode. Because they refuse to accept it. And they'd rather believe something else, and pay someone hundreds and hundreds of pounds to do some kind of ruqyah, and it's not working. The Quran may be giving them some kind of sakina, but it's not giving them shifa, because it's not a spiritual disease caused by ayn or sihr or anything else, or jinn. And that's a massive discussion or a lecture in itself. Maybe you might have a question in relation to that. So we have to apply the appropriate diagnostic tools. And we have to have practitioners who are versed in those diagnostic tools. And unfortunately we don't. So most of these adults immediately are dismissing physical medicine and psychological medicine straight away. It has its purpose, place and role. Okay. Next thing, don't tone down our voices, tell them as it is. Unfortunately, so many people who go through difficulties have to suppress it, have to keep it in. And the reason that they keep things in is because they know how it's going to be received in the community, how it's going to be accepted. Going back onto that jinn story, that's it. You know, when I say absolve agency, what I mean is that if you believe that the causation of your disorder is an external agency that is affecting you, then you're not responsible for it. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah? Let me work that example out with some of my clients, interesting clients. Oh, you know, on a Friday night I get this jinn comes into me, so that's why I'm down raving, taking cocaine, and going out partying, and making zina. And then on Sunday morning when I come back, the jinn's gone. It wasn't me at the party last night, it was the jinn who made me do it. That's essentially what you're saying when you believe in the concept of possession. I'm not dismissing the concept of possession, of course this is from our religion, but I'm just saying that what we have today is that after 30 years, we're going backwards. And we are actually losing the actual disciplines that we have been given in our religion and the sophisticated, forward-thinking methodologies and understanding of this issue, which should make us the world leaders. But as with many other subjects, we're not even part of this conversation. We're not even part of the conversation. Don't turn down our voices. So it's important that we do listen to people. And brothers and sisters, I do want to say, it is a crisis out there. It is a crisis out there, the level of problems within the Muslim community, because there's a triple whammy. I'm going to come on to the triple whammy in a minute of Muslim mental health. The triple whammy is that we have stigma. The factors which are causing mental health within our community are higher than other communities at the moment, I believe. One of them is what we call racial trauma, and the other one is called religious trauma. These are two things. You know, you are the war on terror generation. For the last 20 years, all you've heard about Islam is a demonization and an increasing Islamophobic. I did interviews in the Norwegian press last week, and I was telling them that this anti-migrant, anti-foreigner, anti-Muslim rhetoric and populism that's going across Europe is traumatizing young people and young Muslims, in particular our sisters who are more visible as Muslims. It's traumatizing them, and it's having a massive impact in their emotional well-being and mental health. So the factors that cause it are more. Then on top of that, religious trauma, because sometimes the experience that we have within our own communities is harsh. Don't sin. If you sin, you're going to Jahannam. A number of times I've heard people dropping out of Islam because that is the austere Islam that they're taught about. Where is the rahmah? Where is the, when Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَغْفِرُ ذَنُوبَ جَمِيعًا. Never despair of the mercy of Allah. Allah Ta'ala forgives everything. We never heard this one. Instead, it's a very harsh, you're going to Jahannam, and haram police kind of approach. That creates what we call religious trauma. I write a paper on it in a moment, which is basically that, not just in Islam, in Christianity, and actually in a lot of faiths, there's that very harsh approach, which also traumatizes people. And then people become very OCD. I've had enormous number of occasions of OCD related to whether it's wudu or other ritual behaviors within Islam. And it comes from this perfectionist mentality, idea that, oh, if I get it wrong, then suddenly, oh, so I keep. And likewise with regards to sin, people get so hyper. If I make a mistake, and then they make that mistake and everything collapses like a house of cards. So these are two interesting. So there are some factors which are more challenging within our communities. Like I said, the expectation of our parents and disappointing our parents is another one of them. And then there's the third thing which I'll come on to, which is about misdiagnosis and failure of lack of culturally competent services, a lack of Muslim-centered therapists. Institutionalized racism in the mental health system, which has existed for years. We had a strategy for 10 years called Delivering Race Equality in Mental Health. They just finished 5 years ago, you know, and that was after the death of someone called David Bennett, who was a Caribbean young man who was killed in a psychiatric institution because of racism, because they saw him as a threat. It was perception, not reality. So there's still racism there. And so these are the factors out there. But what makes it even more worse in our community compared to the mainstream is this. We don't talk about stuff. And we keep it in. My PhD was on masculinity and mental health. And one of the subjects I talk about is why is it that the main cause of suicide from 18 to 35 amongst the main cause of death is suicide. And this is growing up in the whole of the world, and more in Western Europe. And predominantly we see non-Muslim men. And I'm concerned about them just as any other part of my community. Why is suicide? Why do men commit suicide? Because silence kills, guys. Because they don't talk about their problems. Because we're programmed to go through an emotional pain barrier. Because if I talk about it, if I cry, I'm not what kind of a man am I? I must be a pussy. Or I must be gay. There must be something wrong with you that you're crying. Because you're going through distress. I've got to cover it up. I've got to deal. I've got to bottle up all my emotions. I was talking to a kid in prison who's now looking at that 8 years. I was his expert witness. He's Asperger's and autism, and he's bottled up his emotions and feelings all his life because he knows no one will even bother with listening to him and no one will take him seriously. Silence kills in two ways. Silence kills because we do not talk about our feelings, and silence kills is because, you know, people of influence, privilege, and position like myself don't talk about stuff either. Our leaders don't talk about it. The people of influence and change don't talk about it. We're not having an honest conversation about it. And that's why we're going to have a crisis, a massive crisis in the next 10 years of And what I call the ex-Muslim phenomenon, or a lot of people falling out of Islam. And when I've analysed this, what I've found more than anything else is that people tend to leave Islam, not because they reject it on an intellectual or on a level of aqidah, on a theological, ideological level. That's not the reason they drop out of Islam. It's probably the minority, about 10%. The majority of people drop out of Islam because they have a negative experience in the Muslim community. And they see a harsh, uncaring community. That's the main reason. There was a case, did a panel in Norway, and it was about one woman who went to the mosque, and very harsh approach to her religion. She dropped out, and again, she had particular issues around her sexuality. She felt rejected. The next Muslim now. As I said, my priority, I'm concerned with saving life, keeping people in the religion, and preserving their mental state. Okay, that's what I'm concerned about. And that means, as a practitioner, I get involved and do things which are not always going to be the black and white way that people want things. Halal haram way. I'm dealing often with the worst solution. That people don't realize how difficult it is to be a practitioner, dealing with these particular issues. When you have a client, for example, a woman who wants to have an abortion, Muslim woman wants to have an abortion because of the domestic violence that she's experienced from her husband for 20 years, and how it's nearly killed her before, and then she can't bear to have another child because he just basically more or less rapes her. Okay, no one wants to deal with that real situation. And so therefore, in this case, yes, abortion is allowed, because do I want her to commit suicide? Do I want her to commit suicide? No, of course we don't want her to commit suicide, nor do we want to destroy her mental health. So it's difficult calls that we have to make in these situations. A lot of people, they just don't want to make the call. And that's why they'll just kind of wash their hands of the issue. Okay, this is a tool that I use. It's called the Headspace Tool. The Headspace Tool is a tool that I developed just to help people to overcome the silence that they are associated with. And we wear masks. The masks we wear because of the distress that we go through, because we don't actually show that we're suffering and we're having difficulty. And I've been in a very dark place in my life. The reason I actually became a psychologist at the age of 13 and 14, I was self-harming. I still have the scars. Nearly 40 odd years later, I still have the cuts on my arms from the self-harm. I'm not ashamed to say it, because I actually wear them with pride now, because I survived. And I've not only survived, I actually thrived, okay? And it helped me. And I said, the reason I became a psychologist is because I said, I don't want anyone to go through what I went as a child. I had no one to talk to, and no one would listen to me. And you go through and dealing with difficult stuff. We don't do puberty very well in our community anyway. In the 1970s, growing up in a poor family with everyday racism, it was tough, okay? And alhamdulillah, it made me very resilient. So I don't actually begrudge it in any way. It made me very tough, very resilient. But I wish I had someone I could talk to. And I wish there was someone who actually listened and saw my pain and just helped me to navigate a difficult landscape. So that's the reason I became a psychologist, is because I said I want every child, especially in our communities, to be able to have that support at that critical juncture in their life when they're going through a massive developmental phase in their life, so that we talk about this stuff and we deal with this stuff. I feel alone, and I feel alone makes me suicidal. That panic because I've self-harmed, so I might see my scars. I'm struggling to deal with my masculinity. I want to be tough. I want belonging. I feel angry because I'm always being rejected and abandoned. Okay, my loneliness means that when I'm crying by myself. I get despair. Where's the love and where's the hope? I suffered from PTSD. I came from a war zone. I saw family members being killed. I saw every day being trafficked from there to here. It hurts. Okay, and I'm still isolated. That's why self-harm is the only way to deal with feeling dislocated and confused. All of it connects, all of it's there. It's the narrative that, that's, so when we talk about, one of the questions is that, yes, make dua. Dua is so powerful as a means for someone to seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's not, the Prophet ﷺ did not just make dua. It was also a prescription of actual physical assistance and compassion and support and partnership and help. You know, I'm going to talk about the 3 C's in a minute, about what really the 3 key ways that we kind of can support each other and make a better supporting community to deal with these kind of issues. You know, and we're not dealing with the mental health at the moment. That's why it's going to create a massive challenge in our community. We're not geared up. How many counsellors do you know? How many massages do you know have counsellors and therapists? How many? Here in Sheffield? No? I did a talk at, I think, one of the mosques here once, and it was after a Yemeni kid, 18-year-old Yemeni kid, was killed on the streets there. I can't remember which... Huh? Yes, that's the one, yeah. So there was a kid, and they wanted me to do a talk around young people there, okay, just kind of like discussing some of those issues. You know, when a kid gets stabbed on the streets, do you not think it had a traumatic effect on his peers, on his young brothers and sisters? How much counselling? How many, you know, who did the counselling? Who did the therapeutic work? No. Asad Khan, rahimahullah, is an 11-year-old boy. You might have heard of the case in Bradford. It's a bit heroin, maybe. People might think it's a bit heavy, this. Inshallah, I'm going to come to something positive in a minute. Okay. Asad Khan tragically committed suicide. It's about 3 years ago. He was 11 years of age. He Googled how to hang himself, and then he took his school tie and hung himself in his wardrobe. The sad thing about Asad Khan, okay, is that he's not the first and he's not the last. And, you know, he was going through bullying at school. You can imagine how bad it would have been. And he felt this was the only way he could escape from the bullying. But after Asad passed away, rahimahullah, and this is obviously the suicide which doesn't fall into that which is going to be punished. You know, this is a kid who was going through utter despair, who is not in control of his mental faculties, so therefore he's suspended from the punishment associated with suicide, inshallah. And when Asad Khan, I remember that I did quite a few lectures that week at talks and events. There's a lot of finger pointing and blame going on. Schools responsible, parents are responsible, kids. People were saying, oh, these kids have bullied him. A lot of grown men were saying, let's go and beat the crap out of these kids. That's our response. Don't realise that kids who are bullied, there's a reason why they've got programmed behaviour. It's called domestic violence, guys. Right? 1/3 of our kids live in homes where there's domestic violence. 1/3 of our kids live in a home where they're socialised to use violence as a way to victimise others. And yet we want to go and beat up these kids as well. Yeah, I worked in prison with violent men, and they are, and in every single one of the history of these violent men. This doesn't excuse their violence. We have to understand why. It's called breaking a cycle of behaviour. Nearly 80% of the cases I found sexual abuse, and I found quite horrific violence that they themselves have been programmed into becoming violent. Now, a lot of the finger pointing going on. And I said to a big public meeting that was had, because a lot of people also said to me, oh, this has happened, I'm concerned about my son and my daughter. My son and my daughter, who's also 11 or 12 and has just started school. And that's interesting, but what I think I said very clearly is this, that it's the wrong thing to say. Asad was our son, and he was your brother. He wasn't someone else's brother. And all of the children are our children. That's the only way you actually save your own children and save yourself, by looking after everybody else. You have to look after everybody else. This approach, oh, I'm concerned about my kids now. Unless we create a movement where we all look after each other and the well-being of each other, really, someone's always going to fall through the net. It's not the last, I'm afraid. The other sad thing about Asad Khan, and I did the khutbah that week, and it's one of the first very rare occasions when I've done a khutbah where I actually finished before my time. Anyone who knows, I think everyone knows, I'm very well known for always going over my time. And the reason was because, you know, it was a very emotional khutbah, because there was a picture that came out of Asad's home. And I couldn't believe that it was such a symbol. He lived in the house which is directly next door to the masjid. Directly next door to the masjid in that street. It's just a little alleyway in between. When I saw that, I thought, that the mosque is completely irrelevant to the emotional well-being of our young people. I'm an Imam Khatib, I've got 5 masajid in Bradford, so it's not as if I'm not. I want all of our mosques to get their acts together. Assad went through all of this stuff, right? And he didn't have anyone to talk to. Not brother, not sister, not uncle, not aunt, not mother, not father, not teacher, not imam, not community worker, not youth worker, nobody. And it's called being present. No one was present to even listen or take seriously or acknowledge what he was going through. The screaming that he was going through in his, and that's why emotional well-being of children is as important as their physical health and intellectual development. Developing secure children who have self-esteem. One of the biggest things I was saying to Abdul Latif earlier, I'm not a big fan of social media because social media disintegrates self-esteem of young people. In this Instagram culture of not feeling that we meet up to a particular standard. And it's been directly identified that young people's self-esteem, we're destroying the self-esteem of our young people in society at the moment. Through so many ways. And that's why, and we're not building emotionally resilient young people. I want to kill myself, I can't take it anymore. The daily struggle that people have in our community, just trying to get through. The number of times, alhamdulillah, my team, we prevented about 3 suicides last year. And that's that hadith, you save one life, you save the whole of humanity, subhanAllah. Okay, I've spoken about the maqasid of Islam. So stigma, shame, and these are all the various kind of words that are used to describe mental health, and how far we are. Mental health is something which is very common, and I said the triple whammy of mental health, as I spoke about earlier, that is causing it. I'm just going to quickly flick through it, and then because I want time for questions, inshallah. The media portrayal of Muslims is affecting our mental health. The whole Islamophobic environment which is out there, racial trauma. Young black men only access the mental health system through the criminal justice system. It's a massive challenge, a massive issue at the moment. Okay, and so, and there's a big difference between culture and Islam, basically. Islam provides a very, very compassionate and caring framework, whereas culture, people are ashamed, and so this is some interesting research that's out there. Muslims don't get mental health problems. So that makes us feel even worse. Because you say, what kind of Muslim? I hear it today, even still, people saying, oh, depression. You can't have depression if you're a Muslim, if you're a strong believer. Of course, strong faith helps us to deal with it. But, it just makes people feel worse. And then, as I said, the whole issue of gym and gym possession as well. Guys, it's tough being young and Muslim out there at the moment. It really is tough being young and Muslim. It's tough enough being young, hard enough being young, hard enough being young and Muslim, and it's even harder being young, Muslim and female. Fact. That's just a reality. The kind of issues that young people are going through in terms of demonization, stigmatization, all these kind of issues, the issues that we're not able to talk about. And anyone who wants this presentation, I'll give it to you, the presentation, so anyone who wants it can get access to the presentation, inshallah. Okay. So ways forward, compassion. These are my 3 C's. These are the 3 C's that I say are very, very fundamental in creating a therapeutic community where we support each other's mental health. First, compassion. Care for each other. Like I said, the Prophet ﷺ came as a mercy to all the world. So show that concern, that compassion for one another. Genuinely care about each other and connect with each other. Connection. Try to find out what's going on in the lives of our lived reality. We're just so disconnected. We're disconnected from each other, from our parents, from our faith leaders. So much disconnection and isolation and loneliness. We just need that connection. When I talk about the metaphorical hug, I'm not talking brothers hugging sisters here, no, that's nothing like that, Okay? But just that hugging, that concern, just that, I get your pain, I understand what's going on, don't worry, we're going to get through it, I'm there. And continuity is the real difficult one. Especially for me, there's so much pressure on my work. Brothers and sisters, be there for each other in the long term. Not 5 minutes, it's called bungee in, bungee out. Someone's got chaos, okay, come in, listen, and then I'm out. No, be there for each other over the long term. And, this is what we call the search for normality, dignity, and things like this. As I said about domestic violence, a massive issue in terms of the construct. that child will go on and just repeat the same cycle of behavior until we break it. And you know what's happened here? It's not just the physical beating. The emotional scar is what? It's shame and humiliation. I get kids here all the time, they're 34 and they're violent. And they were programmed and socialized into violent behavior. So I'm going to shift it up to the end. And as I said, there's a lot here, actually. No, this is a short presentation. This is only 200 slides, yeah? Okay, don't worry, I wasn't going to go through all of it. But you know, Allah Ta'ala gave us 2 surahs in the Quran. 2 surahs in the Quran. Okay, Surah Duha and Surah Al-Insha'Allah. 2 surahs, which is just there that Allah Ta'ala revealed in relation to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who was going through emotional distress, to comfort him, alayhi salatu wasalam, yeah? And, you know, these are the 2 surahs, yeah? But we'll just go through, and it shows, yes, ultimately Allah is always there for us, alhamdulillah. You know, by the glorious night and by the night of, your Lord has neither forsaken you, nor is he displeased with you. It's very, you know, in a community that can be very judgmental, very easily labeled, and very easily kind of make us feel it's not good enough. Allah Ta'ala, He says, Allah is never going to forsake you, and He's never going to be displeased with you. Especially when you're always turning to Him and you're doing the best that you can. And surely the hereafter is better than the present. And your Lord will grant you, and surely your Lord will grant you, and you shall be well pleased. Did He not find you an orphan and give you shelter? And did He not find you wandering? And did He not guide you? And did He not find you in need and make you free of need? Therefore treat not the orphan with harshness. And for the one who asks, do not repulse them. And as for the bounties of your Lord, always proclaim them. So Surah Duha and Surah Al-Insha'Allah and Nashrah Laka Sadrak. And also, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. After hardship, always there is ease. 2 surahs, alhamdulillah, beautiful surahs, as well as the whole of the Quran, which has given us the means to give us some solace and sakina and some peace as well. But the peace of those sometimes can become short-lived for a person, unless also, like I said, we are there to also connect with them and provide them help, support and assistance as well, inshallah. So I shall end it at that. Jazakallah khair. I hope it's been interesting and thought-provoking. I know I haven't covered all the questions, but inshallah that was asked to do. But if you ask any questions, then maybe I can explore them. We've got about 10, maybe 15 minutes inshallah for questions, inshallah. Does anyone want to ask a question? Okay.
Thanks for coming down for the lecture as well. From my experience with a lot of mental health talks, they focus a lot about awareness and the theory around it, but hardly at all touch upon like practical ways of dealing with it. So if you yourself are going through depression, or if you know individuals and friends who have opened up about it, what are the actual practical steps you can take in dealing with that?
Okay. So look, so practical steps in terms of dealing with depression. One of the things I've kind of tried to focus on extensively today is, rather than go through symptoms and like I said, diagnostic tools for you to try and analyse whether I'm in a state of well-being or not in a state of well-being, is that to overcome the biggest barrier, because most people never tell you that they're actually going through depression. That's the biggest challenge, I would say. Or they have an addiction, or they have anything else which is kind of like, because of the stigma associated with it. So the first thing is that create a space, safe space. And sisters, do that amongst yourselves as well. A safe space, a means by which people can actually talk about the stuff that they're going through. That's the most, because I would say that the best thing in terms of what we call success, in terms of dealing with it, is early intervention. The pattern that we have in the Muslim community in the UK is this, that we never engage in early intervention work, that we're over-representing what we call acute services and crisis intervention. That means that we just keep it in, too late, it comes to that point, and then you get sectioned, or it becomes too. So the first thing is create the environment, a safe space, where people talk about their emotions, talk about their feelings, and they feel that they can disclose that. And bring in a therapist, or bring in someone who can then assist and help you in that process. Next, get help early on. Deal with the problems. Don't go into a denial mode. Talk about it. Whenever a client comes to me, I commend them. I make them feel special. I truly, like I said, to say, look, what you've done, alhamdulillah, is so pleasing to Allah, because you recognize I have a problem and a difficulty, and I want to deal with it. as opposed to the one who just chooses to brush it under the carpet and go to denial. And then so many cases I have people who their mental health problems then start to affect everyone else around them in terms of their family, their children, other people as well. And so that damages other people. So get the help, get the kind of early intervention, and get the support as well. Next thing, also, alongside that journey, is that the help, just because someone's gone for help, it doesn't mean the job's done. There is an ongoing process of just continuing to support the individual in the process of their recovery, in the process of them obviously helping to deal with the root causes of what takes place. So the methodology is very simple. It's not kind of complicated thing. You know, Sharing Voices, the project I run, is a community project. We don't use, let's call it, psychiatric interventions. We deal with 80% of problems before they even need to go to the psychiatric problem. How? Through peer-to-peer support, through providing group work, through providing befriending, through providing support, through listening, and through also practical help. Someone needs help in housing, someone needs help with this and that, building self-esteem. So you can deal with 80% of problems amongst yourselves. Also, there's a need for training here as well. Because some of you might need to go through what we call a mental health first aid. If you're interested in doing a whole day course around mental health first aid, we can facilitate that for you. You can put that on you. Certain individuals can become trained specialists in this area, and then you're able to provide what we call peer-to-peer kind of support there as well. Does that answer your question? Good, inshallah. Brother, you had one at the beginning, you were very eager to go.
I've actually got two, but I'll leave.
10 questions?
No, two.
Okay.
I'll
Give me one, might come back to the other, inshallah, yeah?
How do you, I'm not saying I'm going for anything right now, I don't think so anyway, but how would I go around trying to clean my own heart, my own mind, and my own soul?
Okay, so you're saying that if you're experiencing what we call some kind of internal conflict, and some kind of imbalance between your mind, body and soul, you feel a bit troubled, as I've said today, the simplest way to actually deal with it is what? Okay, seek the cure, seek help, talk about it. Go to someone who has the experience and the ability to just help you to actually identify what's really going on, So it requires you to disclose, talk about your stuff, and then the person who is a good enough practitioner will be able to give you some feedback. An example, you don't necessarily have to go to a psychologist or a therapist. As I said, a lot of times you can go to a good mentor or a good someone who is just has a trusted person who has got good experience in life. One of the important things is that what would be a safe space for you? I'm sure a safe space for you would be a place where if you went there, you weren't made to feel belittled, you won't feel humiliated. You also realise the person's got some experience, they're giving good quality advice, and also they maintain your confidentiality. They're not going to tell every Tom, Dick and Harry. So when you realise those are kind of issues there will be a space where you feel very, very confident in terms of engaging.
How do you go around finding something like that?
This is it. It's a big challenge, isn't it? It's a big challenge to find people, and then also someone who understands your cultural paradigm. So then you constantly have to explain different aspects of why your family or people in your community are in a particular way. So cultural context and cultural competence is a very important part. It is a big challenge. You have mental health services here in Sheffield. I know I've worked with them over the years in the past. Sometimes you just got to work with what you have, and try to identify. But as I said, look, one of the core thing I really wanted to get over to you, okay, in the next 10 years, we've got a massive challenge. We need hundreds of therapists and counsellors and mentor, not hundreds in Sheffield, not just hundreds just in Sheffield.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll leave my other question too.
Okay. Sisters, anything from the sisters side? Step.
I have a question. So how do you combat the idea that you can't be sad because someone else has it worse, or I'm privileged and I can't be sad because there are other things more terrible that are going on?
Yeah, and that is it. You said, look, another person is more resilient. Oh, they went through all this stuff, and look at them today. Well, you just see them on the surface. You don't really understand what's going on behind it. You're right. No, it's fine. Everyone has their own baseline. Everyone has their own experience. Some people have more resilience because guess what? They didn't just get there accidentally. They built resilience because you don't know behind the scenes, maybe they have more support networks available to them. And that you might have had more of a difficulty because you have an absence of support networks around you. And that's why that has a more kind of, you could say, challenging impact on you compared to another person. One of the most important things about this whole debate is that when someone does finally open up to you, it's as a therapist, it's a privilege. I'm honoured that someone tells me what's going on in their life. It requires not just empathy on my part, but humility equals humanity. Empathy plus humility equals humanity. I teach that as a formula for healing. So show some humility. The person said what you've got to say. Don't just kind of say, oh, first world problem, oh, this, all right, no. Don't dismiss someone's problems. Okay? Just like I said, treat it with the same seriousness. And remember, like I said, everyone has different experiences and everyone has different baselines. We're all unique as human beings, alhamdulillah. So way Allah wanted it. Some of us can take some real difficult stuff, others not so much. But both require support. Inshallah. So, yeah.
Mashallah, thank you for the speech. It was really interesting. I've just got a question about what you said earlier about mosques.
Yes.
And kind of the role of mosques and the role of imams in our society. Because when I look around, I live in Sheffield, and I can see there's so many social problems.
Right.
I can see there's a lot of poverty in Sheffield.
Yes.
A big Slovakian community.
Absolutely, yes.
Who are impoverished, and there seems to be a big disconnect. They're not integrated into society. I blame the council for part of that, but lots of political different reasons. But when I look at the mosques, I find that sometimes the doors of the mosque is closed, and even like people, if you speak a different language, you go into the mosque, you find that you don't feel accepted, and that's perhaps even someone who doesn't have mental health problems.
Yeah.
So is there more, or how do we better engage our mosques?
Well, look, you know what? This is going to seem really negative here, and I can't add anything to what you said, and I can't in no way can I. Our mosques have become so self-serving. The whole purpose of a mosque is to serve others, not serve yourself. It's a hub for the community to provide for who said the mosque is just for Muslims? It's for everyone in the community, and it's not just for worship, which is 1 hour a day. It's for everything about the well-being, the holistic well-being of the whole community in the vicinity. And it's not because we want to convert people either. I want to get people out. Yes, Eastern European communities who are after Brexit, we have had so many suicide attempts in the Eastern European community. I have a worker who works exclusively with that community because of Brexit. And we should be reaching out to that community because we were migrants once, and the Prophet ﷺ was a migrant. Like our families came as migrants. Get out of your head. I'm not here to convert people. We're here just to do khair, inshallah, goodness to humanity, and treat everyone. وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. All children of Adam are treated with dignity. And everything, all of these issues, homelessness and domestic violence and mental health and disability and environment, the list goes on and on and on. And mosques, unfortunately, are not doing that. I'm very disappointed. I'm really disappointed. I think it's a failure of our institutions. It really is a failure of our imams and our institutions. And that's the only way I'm going to say it. And amongst the whole landscape, maybe one or two are doing some better stuff, but 80 to 90% of them are not. And I think that's it. We have to just, and they're not listening and they don't care. That's it, that's all I can say. And it's just, I know that's not the answer that people want to hear. I think where you do see good stuff, then work with that. Work with the ones where you see some good stuff happening. Ta'awun ala al-birri wa taqwa, cooperate good. And where you don't see it, then don't expect anything. That's all I can say.
How do you try and
Sister, I've spent 30 years trying to do it, and even my own mosque, the mosques where I go, who are a bit receptive, still the progress is slow. It's. And you know what, sister? When things happen is when their own son or daughter goes through it. When I have someone's own son and daughter, they're prepared to pay me £1,000 a week to get the problem done. And, then they're for anything. But when it's other sons and daughters, we don't care. So, I know it's not really the kind of answer perhaps people want to hear. But, we've been waiting a long time. Like I said, I'm 51 now, and I've been involved in my mosques since I was 20. I've been doing khutbah there for 25 years. Okay, maybe it's my fault as well. And sometimes I blame the youngsters as well, the second generation, because they've become so burnt out and so cynical that they don't even bother. So we stopped doing it, Stop doing youth provision for women, provision for disabled. No. So, you tell me. I think if you've got solutions, you tell me what the solutions are, because I'm done very negative, inshallah. I know I shouldn't be. Should be positive and optimistic, alhamdulillah. Okay, so I put my faith in you as the leaders of the future, inshallah, okay, to actually deal with it.
I think good to say that maybe that future generation.
Yes.
Like learning everyday management, learning
Of course, yes.
with those children, we have to be that part of that solution.
Yes.
To be part of that solution, we have to learn, understand what the problems are, understand what Islam is expected to them. And if we don't do that, then the cycle will be repeated, because the Imams and the Masajid,
Yes.
they're not understanding that. So we part of the problem if we don't learn and understand the correct understanding.
Yeah. The mere fact that a kid is stabbed outside of the masjid and he dies outside the masjid because of gang-related issues, and yet we don't even do workshops around drug prevention, crime, stop kids joining gangs and things like this. That in itself sums up what's going on, yeah? And you're right, so the solution is with you, inshallah, okay? And you have to start to, be more conscious of this stuff, yeah? And, change begins in an organic way. Start small and build. And when people like what you do, Allah puts barakah into it, inshallah, and then it grows from that. And look, one of the more important messages is that I don't want to get into a mosque bashing, it's too easy to boss them out. What I want to say is that as students here on campus, and we haven't even gone through all the campus issues, unfortunately, like I said, time kind of run out, but the campus issues there's lots of issues on campus. With young people leaving home for the first time, young people, peer pressure, social pressure, drugs, alcohol, partying, double life, okay, sexual repression, want to get married or can't get married. There's so many issues you guys are going through and people are going through. You need to help each other. And I've always got time for people here. I've always got time. Anytime, you want me to come here, I'm happy, or my team or other people will come. Because I will always give time to young people, because you deserve it, inshallah. And you have we as elders have a responsibility to come and to nurture and to safeguard you. So that's, the change that I want to see is you as a community helping each other and supporting each other. And also, one of the things I like to see is that, irrespective, you're doing your studies, alhamdulillah, may Allah Ta'ala bless them and make you successful, ameen. But also, there's nothing wrong with doing a course in mental health or counselling and doing some work as a mentor or as a counsellor alongside that. Alhamdulillah, do it, inshallah. It's, like I said, if you save a life, you save the whole of humanity, alhamdulillah. One more question, inshallah. Got time for one more? Sheikh.
Do you think Reiki as a healing system need somewhere with Ruqya?
Okay, Reiki is the stones, hot stones that they put on various pressure points in the body. Yeah? And obviously it's based on kind of Chinese and Oriental systems of energy flow within the body. It's got no link really with Ruqya or with hijama. It's not really linked in with those two.
Reiki is like Ruqya.
Reiki is the okay, yes, not with the stones, is it? Is it with Reiki with the stones or just
not with the stones,
with the hands? Yeah?
Yes, with the hands.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know too much about this, but obviously it's based on Chinese medicine. There are lots of interesting things about Chinese medicine. Obviously it's linked to a kind of mythology around energy flow and qi, how energy flows, and what they're saying is that through the Reiki they're blocking energy centers in the brain. Sometimes you've got to be careful that there isn't some ideas which are associated with shirk with these kind of ideas. But
because some people, when they do Ruqya also, they put their
yes.
So
The Ruqya, that's the way. When we did Ruqya, we would put hand upon but remember, the hand is just the connection between the reciter and the person. Okay, it's a bit like when Jibreel alayhi salam squeezed the Prophet Iqra. Okay, it's the same thing. There's the need for a human connection. See, that's what that is about. Okay, it's just connecting the recitation with the person. Yeah. And and it allows you to have some kind of diagnosis of how the person is going to be affected by that. So no, Reiki is not. It's a completely different concept to this, and it's like I said, it's based on qi, how energy flows around the body, and then the healer is trying to kind of move energy around the body. It's a different kind of model. It might have some value, alhamdulillah, it might work. So, but I don't think it has any similarity to Ruqya at all. So, Allah, I don't know where it's inshallah.
sorry, just following on from that,
Yeah.
I had a Reiki session once.
Okay, good.
It was proper weird.
Okay.
The lady mentioned that there was like she had a photo of this old Chinese guy,
Okay.
and she said that his energy was in the room,
Okay. Okay.
and like old spirit, and I've never.
And obviously that then is a form of shirk.
Yeah.
Okay, and obviously like, you didn't know that, and so obviously you didn't, you're not blameworthy for it. But obviously if that is the case, then that is obviously not, that's not correct in that regard. So, yeah. Okay, khair inshallah. The email is there, brothers and sisters. Drop me an email inshallah if you want to have the presentation, or if there's, I'll try to answer questions. Okay, the other way we can answer some questions, Abdul Latif here, is if people WhatsApp you a voice note, or you have a number, a confidential number for WhatsApp, they can pass me the voice note and I can address the voice note if people have a particular kind of question. Yeah, does that make sense? So that's a much easier way of doing it than doing lots of emails, inshallah. Yeah? Okay, brothers, jazakallah khair.